makes it impossible to have political conversations in this country is the inability to assume the good faith intentions of our political opponents, and therefore too often we take differences of opinion to be moral failings instead of legitimate disagreements. It is this inability that leads so many to assume the worst about people and to assign unfair labels to them. When it comes to gun control, assuming the good faith of opposition went out the window long ago and has been replaced too often with emotional arguments devoid of logic or reasoning. Many on the left accuse those of the right of being apathetic to the deaths of children, or worse, of being akin to murderers themselves. Likewise, those on the right accuse the left of actually liking mass shootings as they create higher ratings. As absurd as these accusations may be, they are typical examples of how irrational the current debate on gun control is. So I was pleasantly surprised when I received a message from a Mr. Wilson, one of the organizers of the March for Our Lives in Lincoln, in response to a comment I left them about allowing teachers to be armed in schools. Instead of the emotional diatribe I've come to expect, he responded with good faith questions about my positions, questions I will attempt to answer here. Question number 1. Where will the funding for this come from? Many schools already struggle with funding. Teachers are underpaid, and students don't have the appropriate resources in many schools. First, I'd like to clarify that my position is not that schools should buy firearms for teachers, but simply that they should allow teachers who already have the legal right to conceal carry to do so on school grounds. This wouldn't necessarily require any funding from the schools, as all the equipment and training necessary would be bought and paid for by the teachers themselves. Not all schools are as strapped for cash as you imply. Some schools may decide to financially incentivize teachers to conceal carry, while others may provide additional training, all of which I am for. But that's a decision that individual school districts should make for themselves, depending on their own individual circumstances and the desires of the parents. Question number 2. What happens when an adult attacks a school? How will police and teachers tell the difference between the shooter and the armed teachers? Even in the worst case scenario, that is still better than the alternative. When a shooter is going on a rampage, killing students and teachers alike, I cannot imagine a situation where being disarmed is a safer choice than being armed. When given the choice between using your body as a shield to protect students or having a firearm available to effectively neutralize a threat, having the firearm is clearly the superior option. I do not intend to minimize the potential dangers from a misunderstanding occurring, but instead to frame this question in the context of an actual shooting. This is why I do not support teachers being allowed to simply carry firearms in schools without instructions. Armed teachers and police officers alike need to be provided with the proper training in order to know how to respond to these situations. But again, I want to stress that the potential misunderstanding with law enforcement is still a safer alternative than dealing with a mass murdering lunatic unarmed. Given the choices between coming face to face with the killer unarmed or with police officers while armed, I'd much rather take my chances with the latter than the former. Question number 3. The military has long struggled to get soldiers to fire on the enemy. As seen in Parkland, even police have trouble entering situations when an individual with a military-style weapon is committing a shooting. How will you get teachers who dedicate their lives to children to overcome this and kill a child? Estimates on the use of firearms in self-defense vary wildly depending on where you get your information. According to the NRA, which understandably uses more liberal figures, anywhere between 2 million and 2.5 million cases of self-defense using firearms is reported every year. This is in stark contrast with the far more conservative numbers from the Violence Policy Center, which estimates that there are only around 67,000 such cases every year. This is compared to the total number of homicides committed with firearms, which numbered around 8,100 in the year 2014, 75% of which were committed with handguns, link in the description below. But even by conservative estimations, firearms are used by law-abiding citizens thousands of times every year to defend themselves from robbery, rape, murder, and other violent crimes. Thousands, possibly even millions of people every year have avoided being the victims of violent acts due to their ownership and use of firearms. Yes, good guys with guns do indeed stop violence. In fact, the number of people killed in a mass shooting when police are the responders is around 14 people, whereas if the shooter is stopped by a bystander, that number drops to 2.5. The reason for this is simple. Where police need around 5 minutes to respond to an active shooter, a good Samaritan in the right place at the right time requires no response time and is able to neutralize the threat immediately. If they have the tools and the courage necessary, a bystander with a weapon is the best response to an active shooter. Link in the description below. But even when the police do respond, as we saw in Parkland, there is no guarantee that they will actually protect you. While children and staff were being brutally murdered, local officers cowered outside and did nothing. But let's put aside the incompetence of those individual officers and contemplate a fact that is often overlooked. The fact that the police have no constitutional obligation to protect you at all. In the 1981 Supreme Court case, Warren versus the District of Columbia, the court ruled that the police do not owe a specific duty to provide police services to citizens based on the public duty doctrine. And this decision has been reaffirmed many times in the years since. Given all this, I fail to see why I, or anybody else, should put our trust in a government which claims no responsibility to protect us, and which, in a time of crisis, failed to intervene to stop a mass shooting in progress. Question number 4. Schools are required to have insurance policies. These insurance policies don't allow guns in schools. How will you force insurance companies to allow this? How will we afford the higher premiums if they do? I am not in favor of forcing anybody to insure schools with policies that they do not approve of. But insurance companies insure facilities with armed guards all the time already. Business owners in high-crime neighborhoods routinely keep firearms on hand to protect themselves from criminals. Banks have armed guards, amusement parks have armed guards, even some grocery stores have armed guards, and none of these places have any trouble finding insurance. 10 states already allow teachers to carry firearms in school, with 7 of those states, Alaska, Alabama, Oregon, Utah, Hawaii, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire, requiring no additional training beyond a concealed carry permit. And yet, somehow, schools in those states still manage to be insured. Perhaps there's some cronyism here that I am not aware of. Maybe some schools are required to go with certain plans or insurance companies. This may be the case, but if so, this is not a problem of finding insurance, but of unnecessary government regulation. Question number 5. Police have around a 20% accuracy rate in real-world situations. How will you train teachers better than police officers so students are not hit by stray bullets? To me, this begs the question. Is the chance of being shot by a stray bullet from a defending teacher greater or lower than the chance of being shot by the man actively trying to murder you? I have no good answer for this, but I would imagine that a teacher would at least try not to hit a student by mistake, whereas a shooter would take no such precaution. The 20% statistic sounds questionable to me, and I would need more information to make an accurate comment on it. But the circumstances under which armed teachers and police officers would operate are vastly different. An armed teacher, for example, would not be expected to lay down suppressive fire, or to cover the movement of another teacher leapfrogging into position. It is often the case that an active shooter will stop his rampage as soon as he is faced with armed opposition. Either by killing themselves or by surrendering, mass shootings rarely continue once the shooter is faced with deadly force. Indeed, the mere possibility of armed resistance is often enough to serve as a deterrent. Mass shooters rarely go after hard targets, such as police stations, banks, or other locations where they are likely to meet immediate armed resistance. Instead, they attack soft targets, such as schools, theaters, concert venues, etc. Because of this, teachers wouldn't even have to fire a shot in order to act as a deterrent to shootings. The mere possibility of armed teachers may be enough to deter some threats, and if a shooting does occur, the sooner the killer is confronted, the sooner he will end his rampage. Does the possibility of misfires exist? Yes, but again I ask, is it not better than the alternative? The alternative being that you allow the shooter free range to murder while you wait for the police to arrive. Question number 6. School resource officers have been known to contribute to a phenomenon known as the prison-to-school pipeline. This problem has clear and present racial bias. How will you avoid armed teachers from contributing to this injustice? An armed teacher wouldn't have the authority of a police officer. They cannot make arrests, they cannot detain students, and they cannot put people in handcuffs or take them to jail. A citizen with a concealed carry permit does not gain the authority of police simply because they are carrying a weapon, and nor would a teacher. The only thing that the weapon allows the teacher to do is to effectively engage an active shooter in the case of an emergency. I see no reason to believe that allowing teachers to conceal carry their weapons at school would lead to an increase of violence against students. And if it does, I'd be all for firing or jailing the teachers who act irresponsibly. In conclusion, I would like to thank Mr. Wilson for his honesty and good faith. If he wants to be on the podcast so we can have a conversation about these issues, I am extending an invitation to him. You, sir, are welcome anytime. I personally hope that we can continue this conversation. And who knows, perhaps we can even learn from each other. Thank you, everybody. If you like this video and would like to see more, please visit our website at roads2liberty.com. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter and Facebook and Minds, and listen to us on your favorite podcasting app. The Guardians of Liberty are brought to you by the Roads to Freedom Convention, Friday, May 25th to Sunday, May 27th, at the Embassy Suites and Conference Center in La Vista, Nebraska. The Unconvention features speakers such as Dr. Ron Paul, Larry Sharp, Nick Sarwark, Dr. Lee Herb, plus many more. Visit their website at www.omahaunconvention.com.